China unveils its first crew lunar spacecraft. Some launches, intuitive machines pisses people off, and we uncover what happened with XCOR Aerospace. All coming up on the next Orbital Edge. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Orbital Edge News. I'm your host Chad, and this is a brand new show for passionate spaceflight fans. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce the rocket of the week, which is the SLS, also known as the Space Launch System. Let's begin the show with some launches. First up, we have a Soyuz launch.
Промежуточная. Главное, подъем.
Контакт подъема. Двигатели центрального и боковых блоков вышли на режим главной ступени.
This launch occurred Thursday, February 8th at 5:34 UTC at Site 1S at the Vostochny Cosmodrome in Russia. This mission's payload is a Meteor 3M series of hydrometeorological satellites. These measure precipitation patterns and climate change. Next up, we have a launch from the Long March 3B. This Long March 3B screams off the pad at the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in China. This launch occurred on February 29th at 1:03 UTC, and it carries the WHG-01 mission, which will serve high-orbit internet satellite services. And another China launch. Let's roll it. Sounds like someone was using a typewriter to transcribe the launch data. Actually, it's just the cameras. This is a Long March 5 rocket carrying the TJSW-11 payload, which will offer multi-band and high-speed communication technology experiments. This launch occurred on February 23rd, 2024 at 11:30 UTC. That will do it for the launches this week. Let's move on to some space news. China explodes in the news with their announcement of their spacecraft that's going to be carrying 3 taikonauts to the lunar surface. In this photo here, you can see the crew capsule, which is going to be named the Mengzhou spacecraft. And of course, we need a lunar lander as well, so this will be the Lanyu lunar lander, and I hope I'm actually pronouncing that right. Let's roll this clip here to give you a little bit more information on this China mission to the moon.
应该说，孟舟和揽月这2个新飞行器的名称具有鲜明的中国特色、时代特征和丰富的文化内涵。孟舟飞船、揽月着陆器将和长征10号运载火箭一起，接续承载中国人探索浩瀚宇宙、可上9天揽月的航天梦想。2个飞行器在环月轨道进行交会对接，航天员进入着陆器，并由着陆器将航天员送上月面。航天员在月面按计划开展科学考察和样品采集，完成既定任务后，航天员乘坐揽月着陆器上升到环月轨道，2个飞行器再次交会对接。航天员将月球样品转移到飞船，飞船由月地转移轨道返回地球。目前，长征10号运载火箭、孟舟载人飞船、揽月着陆器和登月服等主要飞行器已完成方案阶段的各项研制工作，发射场、着陆场等系统已完成总体技术方案。科学研究与应用系统和月面活动支持系统正在抓紧开展月面科学载荷和载人月球车等方案研制工作。文昌发射场新建的各项测试发射设施设备也将全面启动建设。
Now they're hoping to have this mission debut by the year 2027. In this photo here, you can see a little bit more information on their lunar architecture and how they're going to get there. This is going to involve not one launch like a Saturn V going to the moon, but it's going to involve 2 launches of a Long March 10 rocket. And the Long March 10 rocket is almost like a Long March 5, except it's a little bit taller, so it's going to carry more fuel. Also, the Long March 10 is human rated.
So both flights are going to get their own trajectory to the moon.
And when they arrive at the moon, they're going to enter into a low lunar orbit.
This way that both spacecrafts can dock successfully.
And then their lunar lander will separate from the crew capsule carrying 2 taikonauts down to the lunar surface.
And this is, of course, going to leave one man to operate the capsule that's going to be staying in low lunar orbit, just like Apollo 11, which would be the similar job of Mike Collins.
Next up in Space News, we're going to talk about the Intuitive Machines mission, and it is coming to a close here. Recently, we've released a space pod covering the mission in detail and the actual landing. So we're not going to cover that here on the show. We do invite you to watch the space pod to learn about what happened after landing. Currently, the spacecraft is running out of power, so we do expect it to die any day now. There was a multitude of controversies with this mission, including stockholder transparency issues, and the fact that they didn't use a landing camera to show to certain people that we really can land on the moon. To further explain this camera issue, we're going to hop over to this comment here that we saw on Twitter, kind of explaining why the cameras were not on the spacecraft. Erudite TWR on Twitter will further explain why live camera footage was not fed during the lunar landing. Why no live feed of the IM-1 moon landing, yet Apollo had live feeds of the astronauts? 3 reasons. Apollo had bigger antennas than IM-1. IM-1 landed near the South Pole, not directly facing the Earth. Unlike Apollo. IM-1 was uncrewed, science was #1. I agree.
I'm now going to make a statement on the
Intuitive Machines mission. I did mention in the space pod I was going to make my personal statement on the mission. And this goes to anybody else who feels the same way I do. Also, this goes to Intuitive Machines as well. So the statement goes like this: we do not tolerate stakeholders who are detriment to the success of a mission, and that includes what has happened with the transparency of the mission status. This is a disservice to the public.
Furthermore, any private space companies who engage in this type of behavior
will not receive any airtime, and neither you should support these actions. Let's keep space exciting for everyone, and let's stop this gross misrepresentation. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, the main topic of the show: what the hell happened with XCOR Aerospace? Stay tuned, don't go away. And welcome back. We are now in Max Q of the program, which means it's time to dive into the main topic of the show. What the hell happened to XCOR Aerospace? Why are they not flying anything today?
What was XCOR? We're going to roll this footage and let them explain what they were all about.
So what we have is reignitable, reusable rocket engines, and that is what I think sets us apart. So we can, use engines that we have over and over again, so by the time we go fly with them, it's like, a commercial aircraft.
Check 1. Check 2. Check 3. Check 4.
This is the Lynx engine that we're working on. As you can see on that side, that's where the liquid oxygen tank is, hidden behind this white cover. Then kerosene tank, so it runs on oxygen and kerosene. This is the whole pump assembly, and then out here is where it comes together. So we have one engine built up, engine number 3 as we call it, but ultimately it'll have all the 4 engines up and running for propelling the Lynx. What sets XCOR apart is the fact that we have piston pumps, which is based on automotive technology. So we leverage on an industry that has evolved and developed into a very reliable and great product.
XCOR Lynx 1 ready for engine light in 3, 2, 1.
where Lynx is being built, the prototype. You can see that the stand that you see at the back is where the liquid oxygen tank ends. Forward of that to the cockpit is where the liquid oxygen tank is situated. Then in the wing strakes is where the kerosene goes. You see the cockpit, it's a two-seater sitting side by side, so pilot on the left and either a scientific payload or a spaceflight participant or a mission specialist on the right. Offset a little bit so we're not rubbing shoulders when we're wearing the bulky pressure suit. So here you see a first mock-up or a representative setup of the windscreens of the Lynx, the outer screens. We have two screens in Lynx, one on the inside, or the curved ones that you've seen on the front of the prototype. That's the pressure vessel, if you will, to keep the pressure inside. And then this is the windscreen that's on the outside to take the heat stress on high speed or re-entry. Next is the wings. They're being built somewhere else. We've outsourced that. And then at that rear where that structure is mounted, that is where that engine will be fitted. And ultimately that should be flying hardware to just simply be mounted on the vehicle if we go fly and back on the truss stand for testing. Our goal is to make space accessible, and ultimately we have to go orbital and even beyond there. But to be realistic, you know, if we can get to a suborbital vehicle the way like Lynx is projected to operate in a few years, I think that's already a great achievement.
Pretty amazing stuff there, and what's cool about all of this is they actually had good testing hardware, such as that 5K engine, and that engine test was pretty epic.
So now we're going to explain XCOR's background a little bit and when they got started.
They were founded in 1999 by co-founder Jeff Greason. Their first project was the Easy Rocket, and this was flown in 2001. Then they moved operations to Texas to start work on their Lynx spaceplane. From 1999 to 2015, Jeff Greason served as CEO. Then in mid-2015, John Gibson succeeded Greason as CEO. Later that year, three of the co-founders, Jeff Greason, Dan DeLong, and Ellie Jackson, left the company to start Agile Aero, an aerospace company focused on rapid development and prototyping of aerodynamic spacecraft. Now more about their passion project, the Lynx spaceplane. This was to carry 2 crew.
And tickets were being sold for about $95,000 to anybody who wanted to go up in this thing.
And this would, of course, just been normal private spaceflight that they were aiming to do.
And about 175 tickets had actually been pre-sold
to people. So you can imagine that many people being disappointed when they later found out the company did in 2017 file for bankruptcy. Flight tests were delayed from 2012 up to 2015. But then more issues started to emerge. In 2016, they declined to further give any test updates, and that's when layoffs also started to occur. Of course, this led us up to the 2017 bankruptcy that came to nobody's surprise. Expensive composites were used on this airframe. In addition, they were contracting with a third party. Complications compiled, and this was the chemistry that led them to their bankruptcy.
So we do have an update about Jeff Greason since his departure from XCOR.
Lately, he's been working on a project called Electric Sky.
So what is Electric Sky? This is beamed power generation over stellar distances.
This sounds awesome. This is interesting future space tech, and we definitely are excited. Let's hope this does come to fruition.
We are going to take another break. And when we come back, comments from last show. Stay tuned, don't go away.
Welcome back. We'd like to thank all of our subscribers and collaborators that helped make this show engaging. With that said, we are in orbit. Let's get to the first comment. This comes from Alex M on YouTube. There was recently an announcement of Jeff Bezos or Blue Origin buying United Launch Alliance. Let's not. We are aware of this and we totally agree. In order for us to be a multi-planet species, we do still need to have programs that are government funded. Without that, we just are not going to get anywhere, past the moon.
This is why China's actually beating us in the race to the moon. And this is all based on, their existing architecture that we had
Talked about earlier in the show about how they're going to get to the moon. And their plan seems like a really solid plan.
Of course, they're meticulously planning this lunar architecture so that nothing goes wrong, of course.
And failure is not an option.
Also consider the worst and best case scenario out of all this.
Let's start with the worst case scenario, which is United Launch Alliance is completely out of the picture. They get bought out, they get rid of the Vulcan, they only launch the New Glenn. Everything's a waste of resources. They put the smallest payloads on New Glenn. Blue Origin doesn't build any other new rockets. And it's a really uninspiring and boring space program.
Of course, the best case scenario is Blue Origin does keep as much of the ULA launch culture that they do have. All their engineers and the culture that they have is still retained. They're renowned for their integrity, their collaboration, and of course, their high quality and attention to detail.
We, of course, would hate to see that go, and then, of course, everything is Blue Origin this and Blue Origin that. We would, of course, with that best case scenario, like to see United Launch Alliance still have the ability to create even more rockets. Of course, this is beyond the Falcon. They could have something that finally will replace the Delta II rocket. They can, of course, replace the Delta IV Heavy too, because their last flight is slated to go this month. I hope that makes sense, and do let us know in the comments how you feel about Blue Origin buying United Launch Alliance. Do you think it's going to water down spaceflight as we know it? You can also follow us on Twitter and further the discussion there. We have reached escape velocity, which means that completes the show. But before we go, we want to give the answer to the orbital trivia, which is one Buran shuttle flight. If you enjoyed this episode, please support us in the future by participating in our social media discussion and the discussion on the show. We will see you next time.